You've seen my toilet. Do you feel blessed? This is Benjamin, and carrying on with When Was Wales, the history of our country, written by Gwyn A after Hywel Dda codified our laws and passed into death. After his death in 950, everything goes to bad. We tend to look at this history as a bunch of petty warring kingdoms, violent, incessantly breaking down into multi-polities. And that's what Gwyn A gives the impression of. He follows that line. But I want to state, no. Wales saw itself as one kingdom, and this was the fighting of different family lines for control of that kingdom, related to common ancestors. This was an inter-kingdom period of violence, not a period of violence between kingdoms, as I'll show you in this video. From 950, when Hywel Dda died and his kingdom splintered up, the north, Gwynedd, re-emerged. The sons of Hywel Dda retook their old kingdom, which really was Gwynedd and Powys. We need to emphasize that. Gwynedd and Powys had merged through marriage long before under Roger the Great. So this was really one kingdom, even though we tend to look at it as more than one, because of what happened in the next 2 centuries. But the south retained Hywel Dda's lineage, even though the northern branch, Gwynedd Powys, was of a related family. Gwyn A accentuates division in our history at this point, and this is the common thread we see in historians. But we have to remember, what we're viewing in our history is when the Normans came to this country at the end of ben .llywelyn, which I'll get to in a bit, who unified our country. They saw the remnants of a kingdom in ruin, and they assumed that it was more than one. And that's where our histories come from, is this division that people have seen in us is not how we in Wales saw ourselves. What we saw was the descendants of Roger the Great, and he, 2 of his sons, were Cadell and Anawrawd. Cadell's line in the south giving Hywel Dda, who were the good and the codifier of our laws, and Anawrawd's dynasty, the north, who rebelled against Hywel Dda's alliances, provoking war with the Saxons. And these 2 branches of the family descended from Roger the Great were fighting each other back and forth over the next 100 years to decide who would rule this kingdom, one kingdom, Wales. And so from Hywel Dda's death in 950, when the kingdom broke up, until the Normans were coming in, and just before that, the Battle of Mynyddycarn in 1081. Remember that the Normans didn't come into Wales immediately when they came into England in 1066. They took a bit to get here and establish a line of castles. And in that 115-year period or so, almost 40 Welsh rulers or kings were killed by their fellow Welsh. And at first this looks like a divided country, but we have to look at their motives. These were aspiring young nobles of these two branches of the same family, most of them, not all of them, trying to claim right to rule this one kingdom forged by Hywel Dda, by claiming the ancestry of Roger the Great before him. During this period immediately after Hywel Dda and our kingdom breaking up into petty claimants rather than kingdoms, claiming this kingdom, fighting each other, England next door was going through a renaissance, a cultural blooming, and this was very disadvantageous for us. We should or could have built upon Hywel Dda's legacy, but this flaw in our law of equally sharing out lands between sons meant we were not able to accrue powerful estates over generations. This flaw in our law was an inheritance tax of sort on gaining too much power in a centralized domain, and it meant we were weakened at the wrong time in our history. Upon Hywel Dda's death, his son, Owain, was not the only son. Owain would eventually take over, but in this context, the codifier of our laws could not ignore our laws, and our laws said the land must be equally distributed among the heirs. And so his kingdom of Deheubarth was split into three, or co-rulers, as it were. He had to share his lands, Owain of Hywel, with his brothers Rhodri and Edwin, and they knew that they needed to unify Wales for it to be safe in the future, and them being the sons of the king who had ruled the greatest kingdom, they felt it their obligation, and so they led an army north to reconquer Gwynedd Powys, and they fought a battle at Llanrwst with the sons of Hywel, who were, like the south, ruling with more than one ruler, and they lost that battle and had to retreat back to Ceredigion. But Owain got a bit lucky in that, or dislucky as you want to say, his brothers died in 953 and 954, leaving him the sole ruler of the kingdom. And he established an heir to follow him, having failed to recapture all of the north. He sent his son Einion to gain lands in the east to then build strength for later conquest. And Einion made some headway, but he was killed by nobles in present-day Morgannwg, and this left his brother Merdydd as the heir to Owain of Hywel's kingdom. And maybe to prove himself, Merdydd regrouped another army, went north in 986 and conquered Gwynedd Powys for his father Owain. And this meant that Owain ruled all of the lands except the southeast, and that 2 years later when he died, Merdydd inherited this vast kingdom. And he ruled until 999, so Wales was quite unified during this period. Under Merdydd we get payments to Norsemen, Vikings basically, and there's a bit of a peace from that end. The raids cease, and he makes raids in himself into Mercia to prove his mettle, pushing back the Anglo-Saxons a bit there, but he does come to blows with them. However, he doesn't lose land. He holds this polity together, and that's important. There was a yearning to end all this fratricide, brother killing brother. In 1043, the Welsh Chronicle notes that a king of Morgannwg died in old age. They wouldn't have even noted his age had it not been a rarity worth mentioning. Dying elderly was rare. The king who would unify Wales, in fact the only Welshman to have ever done so, before or since, Gwyn A, was not doing this and did not do this by mere coincidence. He was perfectly aligned in position, in ancestry and vendettas. When he came to power, he had Gwynedd. And remember, Gwynedd and Powys were one kingdom at this point, through marriage, but he made consistent raids upon the south, because before him, his father, Llywelyn ap Saesych, his direct ancestry is unknown, but we're pretty sure his grandfather was from the same grouping of sons as Owen of Hywel, either Roger Edwin. So Llywelyn, or Gruffydd ap Llywelyn, Llywelyn's son, was claiming that same inheritance. But when Llywelyn ap Saesych came to power in Gwynedd, he killed Iddyn ap Lygyrwyd and 4 of his sons in one go. And then he took the south as well from an impostor. When Llywelyn ap Saesych died unexpectedly, the kings in the east, the southeast, under Rhydderch ap Iestyn, invaded. And this was unusual, or rather it would have been a while ago. But this is saying that the southeast now is claiming this kingdom of Wales. It is fully part of this. It's using Welsh laws now. It's long ago shed the Roman way of doing things that it had carried on a bit longer than the rest of Wales. It was fully into the political sphere of this kingdom now. And Rhydderch does, takes over Deheubarth for a 10-year period. And he takes over Powys, or much of it, and claiming Brycheiniog as his lower sub-kingdom. And so the southeast, for a brief 10-year period, rules most of Wales, basically all of it outside the sphere of Gwynedd. And the men of Brycheiniog at this point, they don't like their position, and there's always been this rivalry between Gwent and Brycheiniog in this period, and it appears they conspired to have him assassinated, and his kingdom falls apart in 1033. The southeast was fully part of Wales, and this was before the Normans had come. Meanwhile, young Gruffydd was too young to rule. He was up in Gwynedd, but he never forgot that the southeast had come in directly upon his father's death and taken what should have been his kingdom. In those days, if you had a reason for revenge, you took it. And so years later, Llywelyn hammered down into the south, and by 1055, pretty secure in his conquest of this southeastern region and his father's former kingdom in Deheubarth. Now this book, the chapter of this period between Hywel Dda and just after Gruffydd ap Llywelyn, is brief. It's tiny of a speck, less than 4 pages. And I'm trying to follow this book, but I did make a video for you about Gruffydd ap Llywelyn specifically, was part of another video, which is this one. And watch just a piece of this, so you can get an idea of who this man was. A little bit here, look at the map. That little peninsula above Wrexham of Wales. That was land that he took back, that had been in English control for a couple, 200 or 300 years, and he took it back to impose unity and to save his country after so long of civil wars. Gruffydd ap Llywelyn's reign ended much as it began: violence. Violence, violence, and more violence. His men killed him in the end, which was a very consequential moment, because at the moment when we needed that strength, we had just come out of being fully unified as one kingdom when we faced a new enemy from France. In 1066, the Normans stormed across the Channel and conquered England in what was essentially a few weeks. Sure, there were pockets of resistance in the fens, and along the Welsh borders, we tried to help some of their rebels, because it would have been good for us had we helped them and they had won. But they did not, and so the Normans arrived at our borders in the 1070s. Establishing earldoms at Caer, Chester, Amwythig, Shrewsbury, Henforth, Hereford. And this is very threatening right away, but King William, the Conqueror, the bastard, he agrees that it's better to acknowledge these Welsh kings than cause too much trouble, as he's quite busy with England itself. And he recognizes Rhys ap Tewdwr as rightful king of Deheubarth, and Iestyn ap Gwragaint as rightful king of Morgannwg. This is a crucial moment. It appears that there's going to be a clear peace between us. But when William the Bastard dies, his son, William, in 1087, is not so friendly to us. And in the violence that ensues, Iestyn ap Gwragaint is the last king of Morgannwg. His kingdom falls. The southeast, a cradle of considerable wealth for our kingdom, the emerging polity of Wales, is snuffed out right before it's fully incorporated and makes us stronger. And that's a severe blow we need to remember. And his name, Iestyn, being the last king of this ancient line, going all the way back to the Silure tribes, this name, Iestyn, from this point forward becomes popular in Welsh culture, and it's a name that we still see quite substantially in use today. Rhys ap Tewdwr, he fought these Normans considerably more than Iestyn ap Gwragaint. He was a bit further away. And he went up into Brycheiniog to Aberhonddu and fought a pitched battle there with these Normans. But he was killed in battle, and the kingdom of Deheubarth fell. And the quote is that with him the kingdom of the Britons was overthrown to the ground. All Wales was thrown to the ground. But that's not an accurate depiction in those annals that we have, because what happened is our kings fled to Ireland, and when they came back, fighting tenaciously for their kingdom, Wales had changed. We were fusing out of the Scandinavian Nordic world into a Latin-influenced European context. And out of it a new Wales would emerge, a new civilization. And that new Wales is what we come to next. If you've made it this far, please consider joining me on Patreon, on the screen now. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much to each and every one of you who do contribute